I got a comment on a recent video about, wait a minute, you don't need to use identify to learn about how magic items work. You can just do it on a short rest. And yes, that mechanic does exist as presented in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So if you want to see how to identify magic items in 5th edition or how that works, stay tuned. What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here. And as I've been stating in a lot of videos recently, read the Dungeon Master Guide, folks. There's a ton of useful information in there. So we're going to jump to Chapter 7. This is the treasure section of the Dungeon Master's Guide. And you can see right here, we have, there's the random tables that start at the start of the book, or the start of the chapter here. And if I reduce my camera a little bit off to the side so we can see more of it, you can see, then there's a section on rarity and the really awful magic item selling options here, which are like, oh, let's give you very swingy, a very rare magic item is anywhere from 5,001 gold piece to 50,000 gold pieces. Thanks for that. That really gives me a good concept of how to phrase those, especially if people want to sell them. And then they have a section on buying and selling, but that's kind of almost useless. Maybe I'll do another video on that. But right here, folks, there's a section called Identifying a Magic Item. So we'll read through this. Some magic items are indistinguishable from their non-magical counterparts, whereas other magic items display their magical nature conspicuously. Whatever a magic item's appearance, handling the item is enough to give a character a sense that something is extraordinary about it. Discovering a magic item's property isn't automatic, however. So let's read that line again. Whatever a magic item's appearance, handling the item is enough to give the character a sense that something is extraordinary about it. So, if you're not casting Detect Magic to blanket search to see for magical things in a room, just picking up an item, you'd be like, oh, look, let me pick up, oh, this guy had a sword, let me go loot the body. So I guess that comes up into the more of the discussion of when you loot a body, do you only look for things you didn't see? If the guy had a sword and maybe it didn't look like it was overtly magical because maybe it was just a +1 longsword, and you pick it up to be like, ooh, is this any good? You were like, oh, hold up. This is lighter. This is sharper. Something's off about this. I know that this is magical. According to that, you would just know by picking it up, but you wouldn't know how magical it is. So then it says, the Identify spell is the fastest way to reveal an item's properties. Alternatively, and here's the rule I was talking about, a character can focus on one magic item during a short rest while being in physical contact with the item. At the end of the rest, the character learns the item's properties as well as how to use them. Potions are an exception, and this is another one. A little taste is enough to tell the tester what the potion does. So again, you don't need to identify a potion. You can just take a little sip of it. It doesn't give you the effects of it, but it tells you what it does, which is something I feel most DMs, this is something I've always remembered, but I feel like most DMs don't. Like, oh, you find a potion. Well, I can just sip the potion and it tells me what it does. Oh, it's a potion of poison. Don't drink that. You know what I mean? Sometimes a magic item carries a clue to its properties. The command word to activate a ring might be etched in the inside, in tiny letters inside it. A feather design might suggest that it's a ring of feather falling. Whether wearing or experimenting with an item can also offer hints about its properties. For example, if a character puts on a ring of jumping, you could say, your steps feel strangely springy. Perhaps the character then jumps up to see what happens, and you could say the character jumps unexpectedly high. That only works for magic items that don't require attunement, right? A ring of jumping, actually it does require attunement. So you'd have to put this thing on and then attune to it and then feel like it. But I guess that's just like the DM giving you a little insight that like, oh, you can jump a little bit higher because you put on this ring. But I feel like in most scenarios, if you find a magic item, you can just take the hour to sit with it and then learn what it does. Again, it is focusing on it during a short rest. So it's not even like you lose out on your short rest. It's during the process of a short rest. So if you have a party of 4 or 5 people and you defeat a dragon horde, everybody can take a short rest or defeat a dragon and enter its horde. After that, you can take a short rest and you can all sit there with an item, all focus on it, and then all identify it at the end of that short rest. The difference being identify They get that done in a minute if it's cast with without being ritual cast, or 11 minutes if it's ritual cast. So in that same scenario where we're taking a short rest, it would take 5 characters an hour to identify 5 magic items, where it would take 1 character 55 minutes to ritual cast identify, and then you'd get all 5 magic items done. But in that same scenario, if everybody's going to be waiting around for an hour, what's the benefit of doing that? If everyone's going to be sitting down for an hour to take a short rest, they can all identify the magic items, whereas the wizard could do the same thing, but then everybody else is just hanging around while they do that. So that's something to consider when you're doing this, which is something I've always thought of, which in my mind, identify is when you want to do this in 11 minutes because you're in a dungeon, you want to identify something, or you want to do it in a minute, identify it so that someone can possibly start attuning to it immediately. Because if you're unaware, it says it right here in the next section under attunement, it takes the time of a short rest to attune to a magic item, a separate short rest from the short rest used to identify the magic item. So it will be 2 back-to-back short rests, 1 to identify and then 1 to attune, which is another reason potentially why you might want to have the wizard identify it, because if they take 11 minutes, tell you this is what it does, someone wants to attune to it, they can then start their short rest right after that to attune to it. Without becoming attuned to a magic item that requires attunement, they only gain its non-magical benefits unless its description says otherwise. For example, a magic shield that requires attunement provides the benefits of a normal shield, but none of its magical benefits. There are some items that tell you get this, but then if you attune to it, you get something better. The one that I can think of off the top of my head is Harzawan, or Harzaron, whatever it is, from Horde of the Dragon Queen, the black greatsword. Attuning to an item requires a creature to spend a short rest focused on only that item while being in physical contact. And it says right here, this item can't be the same, or this can't be the same short rest used to learn its properties. The focus can take the practice of using a weapon, meditation, whatever, or some other property. If the short rest is interrupted, the attunement attempt fails. Otherwise, at the end of the short rest, the creature gains an intuitive understanding of how to activate any magical properties of the item, including any necessary command words. And there you go. Another thing I should talk about is the variant rule here. If you prefer magic items to have a greater mystique, consider removing the ability to identify the properties of a magic item during a short rest and require only the identify spell, experimentation, or both to reveal what the magic item does. I've actually been thinking about this a lot. I've been thinking about incorporating this into my own homebrew setting. I don't have a reason why, and the problem being at this point, the game has existed for 90 episodes and that's never been an issue. So I don't think that's going to be something that happens in this campaign, but maybe in a future campaign set in my homebrew world, maybe something will happen. Something will alter the state of magic or the god of magic, and then now things are harder to identify. And I think the only reason that this bugs me is, 1, because the identify spell exists, but 2, I just remember playing old school video games, and if you don't have scrolls of identify, one that jumps out in my mind specifically would be the Diablo series, right? If I don't have a scroll of identify to identify what my magic item is, I got to go bring it back to Deckard Cain, and I got to have him identify it for me. And that was just a thing on a process that you could do. Oh, I found all this magic stuff that I clearly know is magic, whether via detect magic or in the game, really, just because you're picking it up. But that's how it works in D&D. And then I'm like, I can't wait to figure out what this is. This looks so cool. This sword is, etched in gems, and it's got a jagged edge and has a dragon, pommel. I can't wait to see what it does. And then you're like, well, let me just take a short rest and find out. And that's fine, because then the players can use it immediately. But I feel like some of the mystique is lost because they just immediately know what it is, rather than the excitement of bringing it back to somebody to identify, or maybe the excitement of getting the wizard the pearl that they need to be able to cast identify, or oh, what's it do? What does it do? What's it do? And then the wizard can choose to tell them that or not, I guess, if you want, right? That's a thing that's been very prominent on Critical Role Season 2 with Caleb identifying magic items. But again, to my point, if he's going to sit down and continue to identify these items, other people could be doing it too if they're all just going to take a short rest. But there are other options in the magic items chapter that are not just a list of magic items and the stuff I've covered. There's things for specifically dealing with cursed items. There's wearing multiple items of the same type. There's things about mixing potions and scrolls blowing up, and the resilience of magic items, special features for magic items, all this kind of stuff in that chapter. So once again, read your Dungeon Master's Guide. You'll find a lot of interesting stuff. But more importantly, do you want me to make other videos on the other things contained in this chapter about magic items? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, let me know, were you aware of the short rest mechanic for identifying magic items and the ability to just take a sip of a potion to identify what it is? Those are the base rules as they exist in 5th edition. That's not something I made up. That's not an optional rule. That's the rule. And if you choose to change it, it's a variant. So that's how the game should have been played from the start if you're following rules as written. Which, again, when I read through the magic item section, which, as I've stated before doing all of these videos for all of you, the only section I really remembered from the Dungeon Master's Guide was the magic item section, because that's the one I read the closest. So I remember all of this stuff from the beginning about mixing potions and scrolls blowing up and all this kind of stuff. I remember that. And about drinking potions and all that good stuff. But the rest of the Dungeon Master Guide was pretty much a blur because I didn't focus on that. But let me know in the comments, was this stuff familiar to you, or was it, a fresh take that you're just learning about? Thank you again to my patrons on Patreon for continuing to support the channel. And thank you to all of you for subscribing. If you haven't and you're watching this and you've managed to make it all the way to the end, I thank you. That does help the analytics on the channel. And again, if you haven't subscribed and you feel like you like what I do here, I would love it if you did. And thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time.